The arena roared with the thunderous cheers of countless alien spectators, their voices blending into a deafening cacophony of excitement and bloodlust. Towering above the crowd, the colossal banners of the dominant species flapped in the scorching winds of Garath, a planet known for its brutal landscapes and even more brutal competitions. The Tournament of Dominance was not merely a spectacle, it was a proving ground, a battleground where the strongest species in the galaxy established their supremacy. Warriors from the Maalok horde, Goran warlords, and Velthan enforcers stood at the forefront of the massive preparation chamber beneath the arena, flexing their muscle-bound frames and exuding raw confidence. Their thick, armored hides gleamed under the harsh artificial lights, their weapons glowed with deadly energy, and their expressions held nothing but pride and arrogance. At the far end of the chamber, standing almost unnoticed, was a small group of humans. Compared to the rest of the competitors, they looked unimpressive. No glistening scales, no bioenhancements, no towering frames built for war. They were smaller, leaner, and quieter. Some adjusted their gear, others stretched, but none displayed the same posturing bravado as the other species. They weren't weak, but they weren't advertising their strength either. That fact alone made them stand out to some of the warriors at the front. A Maalok, nearly 8 feet tall and covered in thick, plated armor like skin, sneered at the humans and stomped toward them, his heavy footsteps cracking the metal beneath his feet. "You look lost, little soft-skins," he rumbled, his deep voice thick with amusement. "This is a competition for warriors, not diplomats and scavengers." A few of the other aliens chuckled, their deep, guttural laughs echoing through the chamber. A human, casually leaning against the wall, raised an eyebrow but didn't move. He was average in height by human standards, but looked positively diminutive next to the Maalok. He glanced up at the towering brute with an easy, almost lazy smile. "Oh, we're exactly where we need to be," he said, his voice carrying no fear, only quiet confidence. The Maalok's smirk widened, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "We'll see how long that lasts." A loud klaxon blared, signaling the start of the tournament. Massive doors leading into the arena rumbled open, revealing a battlefield designed to push every competitor to their limits. The terrain was a gauntlet of death. Jagged cliffs, scorching lava pits, unstable platforms that could collapse at any moment. Gravity fields shifted unpredictably, and above, lightning storms crackled in an artificial sky. It was a battlefield that rewarded raw power, endurance, and unyielding resilience. The perfect challenge for the strongest species in the galaxy. Or so they thought. The moment the starting signal flared across the battlefield, the Gorans, Maaloks, and Velthans charged forward with terrifying speed. The ground trembled beneath their weight as they smashed their way through obstacles, leaping over lava pits with sheer strength, tearing through rock formations that stood in their way. It was chaos, a brutal display of power. The spectators erupted in cheers as the strongest species showcased their dominance. The humans, they didn't charge. They moved with controlled, calculated steps. They didn't waste energy smashing through obstacles when they could go around them. They didn't leap recklessly across unstable platforms. They tested their footing first. They weren't the first to reach the deadly gravity fields, but when they did, they adapted. The Maaloks, relying on brute force, tried to fight against the shifting gravity, their massive frames struggling against the unnatural forces. The Velthans, augmented with cybernetic limbs, tried to power through, only to find that their enhancements were failing under the erratic gravitational shifts. The Gorans, too confident in their natural durability, ignored the environment entirely and paid the price. The humans, on the other hand, observed. They studied. They moved with purpose, adjusting their posture, shifting their weight, using the environment instead of fighting against it. Where others struggled, they found efficiency. They weaved through collapsing structures instead of trying to brute force them. They sidestepped heavy rock falls instead of trying to tank the damage. Bit by bit, the pack of competitors thinned out. The strongest warriors were slowing down, panting, pushing forward with sheer will but clearly struggling. Their massive muscles and unrelenting strength had carried them through countless battles, but endurance, adaptability, intelligence, these were things they never needed before. By the time the finish line was in sight, most of the so-called strongest species were barely crawling forward. The once mighty Goran warlords, whose confidence had been unshakable, now stumbled forward with trembling limbs. The Maaloks, their thick armor-like skin once impervious, now weighed them down like lead. Even the cybernetically enhanced Veilthans, who prided themselves on superior technology, found themselves too drained to continue at full speed. Then, almost casually, the humans jogged past them. They weren't struggling. They weren't exhausted. Their movements were controlled, efficient, and still full of energy. They hadn't wasted their strength trying to overpower the course. They hadn't fought against physics or the terrain. They had worked with it. As the first human crossed the finish line, the entire arena fell silent for a moment before erupting into stunned murmurs. The humans, the species that had been dismissed as weaklings, had outlasted the strongest warriors in the galaxy. The Maalok who had taunted them earlier collapsed just short of the finish line, his massive frame trembling from exertion. He looked up at the human who now stood above him, sweat on his brow but not even breathing hard. The human smiled again, that same infuriatingly calm smirk. "Told you," he said, before turning and walking off to prepare for the next challenge. The Maalok could only watch, disbelief clouding his fierce yellow eyes. For the first time in history, the galaxy's mightiest species were forced to acknowledge a terrifying truth: strength alone wasn't enough. And those quiet, unassuming humans sitting in the back? They had known it all along. The aftermath of the first trial left the arena in a stunned silence. The galaxy's strongest warriors had barely managed to crawl past the finish line, their bodies aching and exhausted, while the humans, those quiet, unassuming competitors, had simply jogged past them, as if the entire ordeal had been nothing more than a warm-up. The alien spectators, once roaring with excitement, were now murmuring amongst themselves. Confusion, disbelief, a growing unease. The tournament of dominance had always been a spectacle of raw power, a stage where brute strength dictated supremacy. And yet, the humans had won not by overpowering their enemies, but by outlasting them. Inside the preparation chamber beneath the arena, the defeated warriors nursed their wounds and bruised egos. The Maalok who had taunted the humans earlier sat hunched over, his massive form still shaking from exertion. His kind had prided themselves on their endurance, their ability to take punishment and keep going, and yet he had collapsed while the humans had barely broken a sweat. Across the room, the Gorans, still panting heavily, shot dark glares at the human competitors. Even the cybernetically enhanced Veilthans, who had always boasted superior technology, looked shaken. A deep, mechanical chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the next trial. The warriors stood, some more slowly than others. The humans, however, remained calm, stretching their limbs with measured precision. Admiral Sarah Carter, the leader of the human contingent, exchanged a glance with her team before stepping toward the massive gateway that led to the next battleground. A Veilthan general sneered, his silver eyes flashing with frustration. "That was a fluke," he spat, his voice synthetic from his vocal implants. "You might have outlasted us once, but let's see what happens when you're forced to fight." The second trial was not a race, it was combat. The battlefield was a vast, ruined cityscape, remnants of a world devastated by past wars. Towers of shattered steel and stone loomed over the arena, and thick clouds of dust obscured distant movement. The objective was simple: survival. The last warriors standing would advance to the next round. The moment the signal blared, the battle erupted in chaos. The Maaloks, their pride wounded from the previous trial, charged headfirst into the fray, their massive frames bulldozing through debris as they swung their war hammers with devastating force. The Gorans, famed for their berserker tactics, ignited their plasma blades and roared as they tore through anything in their path. The Veilthans, relying on precision and technology, activated their energy shields and deployed aerial drones to hunt their enemies. And yet, once again, the humans did something different. They didn't charge. They didn't waste energy swinging wildly or activating flashy weapons. Instead, they disappeared. While the others fought in the open, the humans slipped into the ruins, using the environment to their advantage. They moved like shadows, ducking between broken buildings, avoiding direct confrontations, setting traps instead of engaging head-on. The other warriors, bred for frontal combat, found themselves striking at empty air, their enemies always just out of reach. A Maalok swung his massive hammer, shattering a stone wall, only to find nothing but dust on the other side. A second later, a burst of energy fire from above struck his exposed back, sending him crashing to the ground. He roared in frustration, twisting to retaliate, but his attacker was already gone. A Goran warrior, her plasma blade ignited, stormed through the ruins in search of a target. She caught movement, something small darting behind a pile of wreckage. With a snarl, she lunged forward, swinging her blade in a vicious arc. The blade sliced through empty air. Then, before she could react, a rope tightened around her leg. In an instant, she was yanked off her feet, dragged into the shadows by unseen hands. Her plasma blade clattered to the ground, the only sign of her brief struggle. The spectators watched in stunned silence. This was not how combat was supposed to be fought. Battles in the Tournament of Dominance were meant to be displays of brute force, of warriors facing each other in open combat, proving their strength in the most direct manner possible. This, what the humans were doing, was something else entirely. It was tactical, predatory. One by one, the other competitors fell. The Maaloks, too reliant on their size and strength, found themselves outmaneuvered. The Gorans, whose rage fueled their combat, found their fury useless when they had no enemy to strike. Even the technologically superior Veilfins, who prided themselves on strategy, found themselves out-strategized. The humans fought like hunters, striking from the shadows, attacking with precision, never wasting energy, never letting their enemies dictate the fight. By the time the dust settled, only the humans remained standing. The battlefield, once alive with roaring warriors and clashing weapons, was now eerily quiet. The last remaining Maalok, his once proud stance now hunched in exhaustion, looked around at the ruins filled with fallen champions. His yellow eyes flicked to Admiral Carter, who stood among her people, calm and composed, not a scratch on her uniform. She met his gaze with the same quiet, almost amused expression. "You fight like cowards," the Maalok spat, his voice thick with resentment. Carter tilted her head, slightly. "No," she corrected, her tone even. "We fight to win." The arena erupted, not with cheers, but with uneasy whispers. The spectators, once thrilled by the promise of a bloodbath, now feared what they had seen. The Tournament of Dominance had never been about endurance, nor about tactics. It had always been a contest of raw might. But these humans, they were something else. The strongest species in the galaxy had always believed that power was the ultimate measure of worth, that strength alone ruled. But now, as they looked upon the humans who had defeated them twice, they began to realize a terrifying truth. Power is meaningless when you don't know how to use it. And the ones who had been sitting in the back, they had always known that. The battlefield was silent now, save for the distant crackling of flames, licking at the remains of shattered structures. The once mighty warriors of the galaxy's strongest species lay scattered across the ruins, some groaning in pain, others unconscious, and a few too stubborn to accept defeat. Above them, high in the stands, the spectators, those who had cheered and placed their bets on their champions, now watched in stunned, disbelieving silence. This was not how the Tournament of Dominance was supposed to go. No one had expected the humans to make it this far. Certainly not the Maalok warlords, nor the Goran berserkers, and especially not the cybernetic Veilfins who had calculated the odds down to a fraction of a percent. But now, here they were, the last warriors standing. Admiral Sarah Carter surveyed the aftermath, her sharp eyes scanning the remains of the battlefield. The other human warriors around her were breathing, heavily but standing firm, their weapons at the ready, their uniforms streaked with dirt and blood but otherwise intact. Unlike their fallen enemies, the humans had not wasted their strength in reckless displays of power. They had not fought with desperation or blind rage. They had fought with control, and that was why they remained while the others had fallen. A slow, pained movement caught Carter's attention. From the rubble, a towering Maalok warrior dragged himself to his feet, his massive chest heaving. His armor, thick and plated like an exoskeleton, was dented and cracked, his warhammer broken in two. His name was Vartrak, a veteran of countless battles, undefeated in close combat until today. He wiped a thick, dark streak of blood from his mandibles and staggered toward Carter. "You!" His deep, rumbling voice carried across the battlefield, reaching every surviving warrior. You did not fight us. He inhaled sharply, his legs trembling. You hunted us. Carter held his gaze, her expression unreadable. And you thought this was a game, she said simply. Vartrak growled, taking another unsteady step forward. Around him, the few remaining warriors from other species, Gorans, Veilthans, and others, shifted uncomfortably. They, too, had realized what had happened. The humans had never been the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the biggest, nor the fastest, nor the most technologically advanced. But they had something far more dangerous. They knew how to fight wars. The Veilthan general, his sleek, silver plating scorched from energy blasts, forced himself to a kneeling position. His glowing cybernetic eye flickered, his voice distorted by a damaged vocal processor. You studied us, he rasped. You let us fight the way we wanted, and then you tore us apart. Carter finally moved, stepping forward slowly, her boots crunching against the debris. Of course we studied you, she said, tilting her head slightly. That's what humans do. We watch, we learn, and when the time is right, she let the silence linger. We adapt. The crowd in the stands began murmuring, the noise swelling as realization spread through the gathered species. The humans had never been interested in proving their strength in one-on-one combat. They had not come to show off their raw power or brute force. No, they had come to win. You don't fight fair, a wounded Goran warrior snarled, her claws digging into the dirt as she struggled to rise. You hide in shadows, you strike from afar, she coughed, spitting blood onto the ground. You act like cowards. Carter stopped just a few feet away from her. If we were cowards, she said evenly, we wouldn't be standing here right now. The words cut deeper than any blade. The remaining warriors, despite their pain, could not refute the truth. The strongest species in the galaxy had been outmatched, not because of superior strength or advanced technology, but because they had underestimated what it meant to be human. A deep, resonating horn suddenly blared through the arena, signaling the next phase of the tournament. Above them, the sky shifted, and the battlefield around them began to change. The ground beneath them trembled as the ruins morphed, collapsing and reshaping into something new. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, the sky darkened, and a cold wind howled through the valley that had formed. A new environment, harsher, deadlier than before. The final test. Carter exhaled through her nose, unshaken. She glanced at her team, giving a subtle nod. The humans did not need speeches. They did not need dramatic war cries or displays of dominance. They simply needed to win, as they always did. Vartrak, still breathing heavily, turned his gaze toward the battlefield's new terrain. He knew what was coming. A final challenge. A last chance to reclaim what had been lost. But as he looked at the humans, standing unbroken, he felt something he had never felt in battle before. Doubt. For the first time, the strongest species in the galaxy did not know if they could win. And the ones who had always been sitting in the back, they were already preparing for their next move. The final battle had begun. The battlefield, now reshaped into a brutal and unforgiving wasteland of jagged rocks and violent storms, was the ultimate test. The strongest warriors from across the galaxy had been reduced to a handful of survivors, their numbers whittled down by the relentless trials of the tournament. And yet, the humans remained. Not just surviving, but thriving. Admiral Sarah Carter moved like a phantom through the howling winds, her soldiers flanking her as they navigated the shifting landscape. The once mighty Maalok warlord, Vartrak, stumbled across the terrain, his body battered, his strength waning. He had always been taught that strength was everything, that the most powerful warriors stood at the front, led the charge, crushed their enemies with sheer force. But the humans had shattered that belief. They did not fight for glory, nor did they waste their energy on proving dominance. They fought with precision, with patience. And now, as the strongest warriors of the galaxy struggled to keep moving, the humans advanced like wolves closing in on their prey. From above, hidden behind the jagged cliffs, human snipers lay in wait. Their scopes tracked movement below, their fingers steady on the triggers. A group of surviving Goran berserkers, their fur matted with blood, sprinted across the battlefield, hoping to regroup. They never saw the first shot coming. One fell instantly, a clean shot through the skull. Another staggered as a round pierced his leg, sending him tumbling. Before the others could react, the humans were already repositioning, blending into the terrain as if they had always been part of it. Vartrak clenched his fists, his breathing ragged. He turned to the few warriors who still stood beside him, remnants of what had once been the most feared species in the galaxy. Now, they looked to him not as a warlord, but as a desperate leader with no answers. He could feel their fear, their uncertainty. Even the Veilthan general, his cybernetic eye flickering from damage, said nothing. The humans had done something no species had ever managed before. They had made the strongest doubt themselves. A crackling voice broke through the storm, Admiral Carter's voice, amplified by a comm unit. "This is your last chance," she said, calm and unwavering. "Surrender now. Live to fight another day." Vartrak growled, shaking his head. He knew the truth. There was no honor in this fight anymore. It had become clear that the humans were not just another species competing for dominance. They were something else entirely, something the galaxy had never seen before. They did not fight to prove superiority. They fought to win, and that made them more dangerous than anything the Dominion had ever faced. One of the Goran warriors beside him let out a ragged breath. "What do we do?" he asked. "If we keep fighting, we die." Vartrak looked up at the storm-choked sky. The Maalok had fought for centuries, building their reputation as warriors feared across the stars. Surrender had never been an option. But this was not a battle they could win. It was a lesson, and they had already failed the test. He turned toward the human forces in the distance. Carter stood at the front, her soldiers at the ready, their weapons trained but not firing. They were waiting, not for the kill, but for an answer. Vartrak took a slow, agonizing step forward. His weapons, dented and scorched, fell from his hands, clattering against the broken terrain. He raised both hands, a universal gesture of surrender. Behind him, the other warriors hesitated. Then, one by one, they followed his lead. A murmur spread through the stands of the Galactic spectators, those who had watched this tournament year after year. The arena's viewing platforms flickered with holographic projections, displaying the impossible. The strongest warriors in the galaxy had surrendered, and the ones who had always sat in the back, unnoticed and underestimated, they now stood at the top. Carter stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "It's over," she said. Vartrak let out a slow breath, his massive frame sagging with exhaustion. He looked at the humans, those strange, unpredictable creatures who had upended everything he had ever known. "It was over the moment we let you fight your way," he admitted. Carter tilted her head, slightly. "And now you know why humans sit in the back," she said. "We watch. We learn. We adapt." Vartrak closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "And now the galaxy will never be the same.